Mechanic's son asked to fix machine as joke. His engineering genius shocks everyone. They said nothing ever changed in Millbridge, a place where the same trucks rumbled down the same streets every morning, where the whistle from the steel plant marked time better than any clock, and where names mattered more than truth. In this town, people remembered who your father was, what job he had, and whether he shook hands with the right people. If you were born into a respected family, you had options. If you weren't, you had to earn every scrap of respect, and even then, most of it came with conditions. Noah Green was just 8 years old, but already he knew where his family stood. His dad, Micah, ran Green's Garage, a small two-bay repair shop sandwiched between a pawn shop and a closed-down diner with sun-faded menus still taped to the window. Most days, Noah spent his afternoons after school in the shop, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He loved the smell of brake fluid and the satisfying click of a socket locking into place. He could tell the make of a car by the sound of its starter motor, could spot a bad serpentine belt before the hood even opened. While other kids played games or chased each other around the schoolyard, Noah listened to the rhythm of machines and watched his dad's hands work like they were speaking a language only a few people understood anymore. The town didn't see that, though. They saw a greasy building with rusting signage and assumed Noah was just another mechanic's kid who'd end up turning wrenches out of necessity, not choice. It didn't help that Micah was a quiet man. He didn't advertise, didn't flatter, didn't go to town hall meetings or schmooze with the plant managers. He just fixed what was broken and charged what was fair. But in Millbridge, fairness didn't always pay the bills. Big contracts went to shops with polished waiting rooms and shiny new uniforms. Green's Garage got the overflow, the jobs nobody else wanted, or the loyal few who still believed skill mattered more than branding. Noah didn't mind. He loved watching his dad work through a problem. Sometimes Micah would explain what he was doing, not in the way most adults talk down to kids, but like he actually believed Noah could follow, and Noah always did. Once, when Micah was elbow-deep in a stalled F-150's fuel system, Noah pointed out that the idle sounded too smooth for a clogged injector. He was right. It turned out to be a cracked sensor cable rubbing against the manifold. From that moment on, Micah started asking Noah's opinion more often. Not as a gimmick, but because the boy noticed things most people missed. At school, though, it was a different story. Noah's clothes smelled faintly of engine oil, no matter how many times his mum washed them, and the other kids sometimes teased him for the smudges on his hands or the grease under his fingernails. He didn't fight back, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't see the point. He knew what he was good at, and that was enough for him. Or at least, it used to be. Everything started to change the week the factory press broke down. At Millbridge Steel, the hydraulic press was the heart of production. Without it, nothing moved. The machine weighed more than a dozen trucks, operated under pressures that could flatten a car in seconds, and had sensors and relays more complex than anything Noah had ever seen. When it failed, the whole line stopped, and so did profits. The engineers couldn't figure it out. 3 days in, and the machine still sat cold and useless, bleeding money by the hour. That's when Tyler Morgan got his idea. Tyler, the factory owner's son, walked through life like the world owed him applause. He had the kind of confidence that didn't come from achievement, but from knowing no one had ever told him no. And when Tyler looked at Noah, he didn't see a curious kid with an engineer's mind. He saw an easy laugh, someone to mock in front of his friends, someone who didn't belong in the world of million-dollar machines. So he made a plan, a setup, a harmless joke, as he'd later call it. Just bring the mechanics boy in, let him look confused, maybe say something dumb, and capture it all on video. It would be perfect, viral even, proof that some people were just meant to stay in the background. What Tyler didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Noah had spent his whole life preparing for that exact moment. Not in school, not in training programs, but on cold concrete floors next to his father, with his hands wrapped around socket wrenches and his ears tuned to the language of failing engines. He didn't need credentials to recognize a misaligned sequence or a pressurization fault. He just needed a chance. and Tyler, without realizing it, had just handed him one. Tyler Morgan never asked questions. He gave commands. In a town like Millbridge, that was easy enough when your last name was stamped on paychecks and your mother's signature decided who stayed employed and who got let go. He had never been told to earn his place, only to maintain it, and part of maintaining it meant putting others in theirs, especially people like Noah Green. In Tyler's world, kids from places like Green's Garage weren't supposed to rise above a certain ceiling. They were useful in the background, fixing engines, patching tires, maybe changing oil for Tyler's BMW someday, but they weren't supposed to stand out. They weren't supposed to be noticed. So, when word got around school that the plant's $1 million hydraulic press had gone down, Tyler saw not a problem, but an opportunity. The engineers at Millbridge Steel were baffled, and production had been frozen for 3 days. Every minute of downtime was costing real money. Meetings had turned into arguments. Flowcharts covered whiteboards. Specialists were called in, but nothing worked. The machine remained a cold, silent giant. Tyler, of course, didn't understand much about the machine itself, but he understood timing, and he knew how to turn a situation into a show. The idea came to him during lunch when he overheard a couple of classmates talking about Noah fixing a teacher's lawnmower over the weekend. They were impressed, maybe even a little amazed. That bothered Tyler more than he'd admit. The fact that anyone would be talking about Noah Green like he was smart, like he mattered, felt wrong. Noah was supposed to be invisible, or at best amusing. Tyler grinned to himself and leaned across the table to whisper something to his two closest friends, Carter and Miles. The kind of whisper that had an edge. The kind of whisper that always led to someone else's humiliation. By the time lunch was over, the plan was set. Bring the kid to the factory. Pretend to let him help. Watch him crash and burn in front of real engineers and workers. Film it, share it. Let the whole town see that for all the grease under his nails, Noah was still just a kid playing pretend. The invitation came casually, as if it were a compliment. That was Tyler's style. He didn't shout, he smiled. He found Noah near the bike rack after school, his hands already darkened by a morning spent adjusting an alternator belt on a neighbor's truck. "Hey Noah," Tyler said, his voice laced with friendly confidence. "I heard you've got a talent for fixing things." Noah looked up, cautious. Tyler never talked to him unless it was to mock something. His boots, his hair, the way he always smelled faintly like motor oil. "The press at my mom's factory is down," Tyler continued. "Big problem. Thought maybe someone like you could take a look. Fresh eyes, right?" It was the way he said it. Light, dismissive, like he didn't really expect anything. Like it was a joke too inside to need explaining. But what caught Noah off guard was the sudden change in tone. There wasn't the usual smirk, or at least not an obvious one. For a moment, Noah hesitated. Something didn't feel right. But then he thought about the press, the kind of industrial machine he'd only read about in library books, the kind of machine he'd dreamed of seeing up close. And more than that, he thought about what his dad always said when a customer came in with a confusing problem. "You don't learn much from what you already understand." So he agreed. He said yes. And just like that, Tyler had everything he wanted. That night, Tyler planned every step. He called ahead to the plant and told the floor supervisor that he was bringing in a local prodigy to take a look. His tone dripped with sarcasm, but no one pushed back. Tyler Morgan could walk into the control room and no one would question it. He made sure Carter had a good angle on his phone camera and told Miles to prep a few sarcastic one-liners in case the video needed commentary. They wouldn't just record Noah failing, they'd produce it. They'd make it entertainment. The next morning, the black SUV pulled into the gravel lot outside Green's Garage, with the kind of authority that only money could buy. The vehicle looked like it had never known dust or dirt, parked next to the sun-bleached Chevy that Micah had been trying to keep running for 3 winters too long. Tyler stepped out, perfectly styled as usual, wearing a polo that probably cost more than Noah's entire wardrobe. "You ready?" he asked, like they were old friends. Noah, standing beside his father, hesitated for just a moment. Micah wiped his hands on a rag and looked between his son and the SUV. He didn't like it, didn't like the sudden interest. But when he looked at Noah, he saw that gleam, the one that came when a new problem was waiting to be solved. So with reluctant approval, he gave a nod. 1 hour, he said quietly. No machines running, just looking. As the SUV drove off, the silence inside was sharp. Carter tapped his phone screen to make sure it was recording. Miles whispered a joke about baby genius and Tyler smirked. But Noah stared out the window, watching the familiar streets turn into steel gates and wide factory yards. He didn't care about their jokes. He was already trying to picture the machine, already thinking through pressure curves and safety interlocks, already listening for what the system might be trying to say. Tyler leaned back and grinned to himself, certain that the show was about to begin. He had no idea that this time the punchline wouldn't be what he expected. The SUV rumbled through the industrial edge of Millbridge, where steel fences lined the roads and smokestacks reached toward a sky that was always more gray than blue. Factories here didn't sleep. They paused just long enough for the next shift to clock in. The streets were quieter on this side of town, but everything carried a low thrum of purpose, the kind of mechanical heartbeat that Noah had always found oddly comforting. He pressed his forehead lightly against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching as red brick warehouses and rows of employee cars gave way to something bigger, the silhouette of Millbridge Steel. The plant looked like a city unto itself. Acres of machinery, corrugated metal buildings, high-voltage warning signs, and loading bays that seemed to stretch forever. Tyler pulled up to a gate where a security guard in a neon vest gave a lazy salute, then hit the button to raise the barrier. Noah noticed the guard didn't even check ID. Tyler didn't have to explain himself. His family name was all the clearance he needed. As they passed through, Noah sat a little straighter, taking everything in. The layout of the factory yards, the forklifts zipping between bays, the overhead cranes resting in their tracks, the stacks of steel components awaiting their place in some larger system. It wasn't chaos, but it was movement, controlled, deliberate movement. He studied it like a mechanic studies an engine, already identifying how one piece fed into another. To someone else, this might have looked like a mess. To Noah, it was a system waiting to be understood. Tyler glanced back at him in the rearview mirror, his smile tight and expectant. Pretty cool, huh? That press you're about to see? Costs more than your entire block. He said it like a fact, not a brag. But Noah understood the meaning behind the words. He wasn't being welcomed. He was being reminded that this was not his world, that this visit was a novelty, a borrowed glimpse into a realm where kids like him didn't belong. But Noah wasn't listening to the tone. He was already wondering about the press, what kind of hydraulic control system it used, what redundancy fail-safes were built into the circuit, whether it operated on a servo-hydraulic loop or a fixed displacement model. He wasn't here to impress Tyler. He was here to see something real. Inside the factory, the air changed. It smelled of hot steel, cutting fluid, and ozone, the sharp metallic bite that meant power was flowing somewhere nearby. The noise hit them in layers. First came the background hum of massive generators, then the staccato clank of components hitting conveyors, and finally the deep, pulsing silence of one machine that wasn't working. Even among the symphony of motion, you could feel that something was missing. As they stepped into the production floor, workers in dark blue uniforms and safety glasses moved with practiced rhythm. No one paused to stare. They were too focused, too worn out, too accustomed to being told what to do by people like Tyler. But when they caught sight of the kid walking behind him, eyebrows raised. What was an 8-year-old doing on the production floor of the most important plant in the region? Even the seasoned foreman, a grizzled man named Cole with 30 years of steel in his blood, looked up from a clipboard, blinking once before narrowing his eyes. This wasn't routine. Tyler led them toward the far end of the factory where the hydraulic press towered in silence like a fallen giant. It was impossible to miss, 20 feet tall, 40 feet long, built like a bunker and housed in reinforced steel. It had cost the plant nearly $2 million, and was supposed to be the cornerstone of their next generation of output. Now it sat idle, lights blinking red across the control panel, and the only sound it produced was the occasional hiss of static pressure bleeding off into nothing. "There she is," Tyler said, gesturing with mock grandeur. "The beast that no one can tame. You ready to show us what the genius grease monkey can do?" His voice was still casual, still pretending this was harmless fun. But underneath it, Noah caught something else: urgency. This machine wasn't just expensive. Its failure was causing damage, real damage, and Tyler's family name was tied to it. Noah didn't respond. Instead, he walked slowly toward the safety barrier surrounding the press, stopping just short of the warning tape. His hands stayed at his sides, just like his dad had taught him. Never touch until you understand. Respect the machine first, ask questions second, only then do you act. He looked over the machine like he was reading a story, eyes scanning the valve blocks, tracing the lines of the hydraulic tubing, noting the control panel layout. Most kids would have been overwhelmed, but Noah didn't see something too big. He saw something specific. This wasn't magic, it was logic, wrapped in steel and oil. Carter leaned against a nearby railing, phone still discreetly recording. Miles cracked a joke about giving the kid a hard hat that would actually fit his head. No one laughed, not even Tyler. Noah had done something none of them expected. He didn't flinch. He didn't act like he was out of place. He was thinking. Cole, the foreman, walked over, chewing on the end of a pen. "You the kid they brought in?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel. "What? You gonna tell us where to plug in the batteries?" But even he didn't sound confident in his own sarcasm. Noah pointed toward one of the control relays. "That light's stuck on ready, even though the system's idle," he said quietly. "It might be signaling a false start. Could be a misfiring safety interlock. Or maybe it's not receiving full flow." Cole blinked. So did Tyler. "Flow?" the foreman asked. "Hydraulic flow," Noah answered. "You can have pressure without movement if a valve's stuck or only partly open. It tricks the system into thinking it's ready, but nothing moves, and it won't fault out because the sensors show pressure, but it's not doing anything." His tone was calm, not arrogant, not excited, just clear, like someone reporting what they saw. Tyler opened his mouth to say something, maybe to laugh, maybe to brush it off, but the words never came. He wasn't expecting this. No one was. Carter slowly lowered his phone, and Cole, instead of laughing, turned toward the nearby console with a frown. He keyed in a command. A few lights blinked. A screen flickered. He didn't say anything, but the tension in his jaw said enough. The press hadn't moved in 3 days. But now something was shifting, and for the first time since they'd stepped onto the factory floor, it wasn't Noah who looked like he didn't belong. It was Tyler. The hydraulic press loomed over everything like a sleeping monster. It didn't hum or shudder or hiss. It simply stood there, heavy and still, a fortress of silent steel. Every inch of it radiated power, the kind that could flatten a truck axle with a slow, effortless squeeze. Noah stood just outside the yellow safety line, his arms loosely crossed, taking in the intricate network of pipes, relays, control boards, and warning lights. He didn't move or speak right away. He just observed, and in that moment something about him shifted in the eyes of those watching. He didn't look like a kid playing make-believe. He looked like someone reading a language no one else in the room could fully understand. Cole, the foreman, hovered nearby with his arms folded tight, eyes narrowed in skeptical interest. For 3 days, his team of seasoned maintenance workers and outsourced engineers had poked, prodded, recalibrated, and tested every segment of the press system, only to hit dead ends again and again. Nothing obvious had failed. The readings were clean. The pressure was there. Sensors flashed green. But when they tried to engage the system, nothing happened. The press wouldn't cycle. It was like a muscle with no command from the brain, powerful but disconnected. Frustrating didn't begin to describe it. The plant was bleeding money, production was at a standstill, and Cole knew Diane Anderson would be looking for someone to blame. And now, a child stood in front of the most expensive piece of equipment in the building. Tyler, just a few feet behind Noah, had expected this to be the highlight of the show. where Noah made some ridiculous suggestion and looked like an amateur in front of real professionals. But now, Tyler felt a strange shift in the air. People were watching, but not for a joke. They were watching to see if Noah might actually see something they'd missed. Noah took a slow step forward, not crossing the line, just leaning close enough to examine the control interface. "Is this the only panel?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. Cole glanced at him, surprised by the question. "There's a secondary panel on the maintenance catwalk," he replied, "but it's isolated when the system is shut down." Noah nodded slightly, as if filing that away. Then he pointed at a set of indicator lights near the main press cylinder. "Those look like flow regulation sensors. Are they programmable or analog?" Cole blinked, then shrugged slowly. "Programmable, tied into the PLC array." Noah didn't say okay or got it like most kids would. He just kept going, eyes tracking the lines from the high-pressure pump to the accumulator and then over to the isolation valve near the pressure regulator. "What if the valve stuck partially closed?" he asked, more to the machine than anyone around him. "That would explain why the system builds pressure but doesn't engage. The sensors would report normal pressure, but the flow rate would be too low for a full cycle. The press won't move without complete flow. It's a safety precaution, right?" Cole stared at him. "We checked the accumulator pressure. Readings are normal." Noah nodded, unfazed. "But did anyone check if the valve that controls flow from the accumulator is fully open? Not the pressure. It's about volume. You can have a full tank and still be sipping through a straw." That was the moment something clicked. Not in the machine, but in the room. One of the engineers, Frank, a compact man with a thick grey beard, turned toward a diagnostics terminal and began typing rapidly. "Give me a second," he muttered. "Let's confirm that isolation valve readout." His voice, for the first time in days, carried a new urgency. A technician nearby brought up the control logs. Numbers began to scroll. Frank frowned. "It says 87% open." Cole leaned over. "Should be 100% in standby." "It thinks it's fully open," Frank said slowly. "But that could be a stuck actuator or a misaligned sensor. Hell, if the valve's gummed up from the last fluid change, it could be physically stuck while reporting normal." Tyler took a step back. His face had gone pale. This was supposed to be a prank, a joke, a staged performance for likes and laughs. But now the kid wasn't flailing. He was diagnosing, like a surgeon reading a silent heartbeat and saying, "That's not how it should sound." Frank moved fast. "Let's try a manual cycle on that valve, from the maintenance panel. We'll hear the difference in hydraulic flow if it's actually been restricted." Two technicians disappeared up the metal stairs, their boots clanging against steel. A few seconds later, a muffled clunk echoed across the shop floor, followed by a low, rising hum, deeper than before, richer, more alive. Noah tilted his head slightly. "There it is," he murmured. "That's the right sound." Cole's eyes widened. "Run a test cycle." Frank didn't wait for approval. He keyed in the startup sequence, eyes flicking between readouts. The press hesitated, then roared to life. Cylinders extended, retracting in perfect rhythm. Safety lights cycled from red to amber to green. The test material, a thick steel plate, compressed under force with flawless precision. The floor fell into stunned silence. Cole shook his head in disbelief. 3 days of downtime, thousands of dollars in losses, and the mechanics kid spots it in 5 minutes. Workers had started gathering nearby, pulled by the sound of the press finally doing its job, and every one of them looked at Noah the same way, not as a curiosity, but with a kind of quiet respect. The press hadn't been broken, it had been misunderstood, and Noah had listened better than anyone else in the building. Tyler said nothing. His carefully constructed plan had crumbled into dust. He watched as Cole walked over to Noah and crouched slightly so they were eye level. "How do you know to look there?" Noah shrugged, like it was obvious. "If you've got pressure but nothing's moving, it's not about power, it's about flow. The valve's not part of the main sequence, so it's easy to overlook. But if it's stuck, the whole system acts like it's dead." The simplicity of it cut through everything. No bravado, no exaggeration, just clear understanding. Cole stood, turned to Frank, and said the one thing no one had expected to hear that morning. "Get this kid on the visitor list." I want him coming back here any time he wants." Tyler turned to leave, his steps a little too quick, his jaw a little too tight. The show was over, but the ending wasn't his. And for the first time in Millbridge, it wasn't the name on the paycheck that got people talking. It was the kid with grease under his fingernails who knew how to listen. The press groaned once, then came fully to life, like some dormant giant shaken awake after days of silence. The great metal arms extended with quiet authority, hydraulic cylinders hissing in perfect rhythm as the steel plate on the bed compressed with a smoothness that hadn't been seen since the day it was installed. Every eye in the room turned to watch. Some stared at the machine, but most stared at the boy. Noah Green, standing calm and steady at the edge of the yellow line, hands clasped behind his back like a junior technician giving a systems review. For a few seconds no one said anything, not because they didn't have anything to say, but because they didn't trust their voices not to betray the shock that clamped around their throats. Then came the murmurs, short, scattered fragments of conversation rising like steam off hot metal. "That kid just fixed it. He called the valve issue like it was nothing. Is that Micah's boy? You see how fast that thing kicked in after his suggestion?" The whispers rippled outward from the press like waves. No one laughed, no one joked, because everyone knew how serious this failure had been. 3 days of round-the-clock troubleshooting by engineers and technicians, multiple outside consultants, diagnostic equipment flown in from the city, and it took an 8-year-old, a mechanic's son, to walk in and see what no one else did. Not with advanced software, not with some fancy tool, just his eyes, his ears, and his mind. Cole turned to Frank, still trying to wrap his head around the simple truth. "We overcomplicated it," he said, not angry but awed. "We thought it had to be a software bug or a faulty sensor, but it was mechanical, simple flow obstruction. We read the gauges, but we didn't listen to what the system was trying to say." Frank ran a hand through his beard and nodded slowly. "The readings were clean, so we trusted them more than we trusted our instincts. Kids saw past the data. That's rare, especially these days." He turned to Noah with a small, honest smile. "How'd you learn to think like that?" Noah didn't answer right away. He glanced down at his shoes, still dusty from the shop floor back at the garage, then back up at Frank. "My dad says machines are like people. You can't always trust what they say up front. You gotta watch how they act." The room went quiet again, not out of disbelief, but out of something deeper, respect. Tyler stood on the edge of the scene, arms crossed tighter than before, his jaw clenched hard enough to ache. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The joke was supposed to be on Noah. They were supposed to leave the factory laughing, shaking their heads about the grease monkey kid who thought he could play engineer. The video was supposed to be a hit, shared around school, maybe even picked up by one of those accounts that loved to mock small-town moments. Instead, it was Tyler who looked ridiculous. No one was looking at him now, not even his friends. Carter and Miles stood frozen, no longer whispering smart remarks. Their earlier smugness evaporated. They'd seen it with their own eyes. And worse, they'd believed it before anyone else did. Cole clapped his hands once, loud and sharp. "All right, let's get this thing back into the production schedule. Someone call maintenance and let them know the valve needs a permanent clean-out. We'll flush the system, check the actuator housing, and recalibrate the feedback loop to confirm." His voice rang with purpose, urgency reborn. Then he looked at Noah again, slower this time, more deliberate. "You just bought us a whole week's worth of saved output, you understand that?" Noah shifted his weight, unsure how to respond. It wasn't praise he wanted, he wasn't even sure what to do with it. "I just wanted to see the machine," he said. "It didn't sound broken, just confused." The phrase struck something in the room, something that hovered between genius and simplicity. It didn't sound broken, just confused. One of the shift engineers stepped forward and extended a hand. "You've got something rare, kid. Don't let anyone make you feel small for it." Noah shook his hand, his fingers still slightly stained with oil from the morning's work at the garage. "Thanks," he said, then added, "but I've still got a lot to learn." It wasn't a boast, it was a promise. The attention turned toward Micah's garage like gravity had shifted. Green's garage, long overlooked in favor of sleeker businesses with better advertising, now carried the story of the boy who solved the problem a room full of experts couldn't. The engineers would talk. The workers would tell their families. Within a few days, people across the factory's chain of suppliers would hear the story, each version slightly more dramatic than the last, but all centered on the same truth. The mechanic's kid was no joke. Tyler, meanwhile, remained rooted in place. He was quiet, not just from embarrassment, but from something darker, resentment, a deep, festering shame that clawed at him. He had brought Noah here to humiliate him, to cement his own place at the top of the food chain. But instead, he'd handed the spotlight over to someone who didn't even want it, someone who hadn't asked for praise or power, someone who had simply shown up and done what needed to be done. That stung more than he could admit, because in Tyler's world, status was everything, and Noah had just proven that skill could upend the whole system. As the workers returned to their stations and the press began cycling on schedule again, Cole pulled Noah aside and crouched slightly to his level. "You've got a future in this, you know that? This isn't a fluke. You saw what we missed because you looked with your own eyes, not someone else's checklist. We need more people like that." He paused, considering something. "You ever think about engineering school someday?" Noah blinked. He hadn't, not really. His whole world had been tools, trucks, and the scent of transmission fluid hanging in the air. "I like fixing things," he said after a beat. "I like figuring out why they stop working." Cole nodded slowly. "That's how the best engineers start. They listen to machines before they ever design them." Noah didn't answer. He didn't need to, because in that moment, something else had started working, something invisible but just as real. A sense that maybe he didn't have to be defined by the town's expectations. That maybe, just maybe, a boy who grew up listening to broken engines could grow into a man who built the ones that never failed. And without saying a word, he turned toward the press, now alive and humming behind him, and smiled. Not for the crowd, not for recognition, but because he had heard something in that machine no one else had, and it had listened back. The next morning, Millbridge woke up differently, not because the skies were clearer or the steel plant's whistle had changed pitch, but because the whispers that started on the factory floor the day before had spread, first through the night shift, then to the foreman, then to the cafeteria ladies and supply drivers, and finally out beyond the gates and into the veins of the town. Word traveled fast here, not through headlines or breaking news, but through worn voices over coffee counters, through diesel-soaked gloves gripping steering wheels, through cautious nods passed from one pair of knowing eyes to another. And what they all said in one way or another was this: the green kid fixed the press. At first, people didn't believe it. A boy, 8 years old, fixed a machine that professional engineers couldn't get to move for 3 straight days? There had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe he just guessed something and got lucky. Maybe he was standing there when someone else figured it out. But then the details started lining up too perfectly to dismiss. The press had been stuck despite having full pressure. The sensors had read fine, but Noah had pointed out the flow issue without touching anything, just by watching and listening. And after his suggestion, the manual override worked, and the whole system roared back to life. People in Millbridge didn't hand out praise easily, especially not to outsiders, or anyone they thought was trying to step out of line. And for years, that's exactly how they treated Micah Green and his garage. A capable man, sure, and a good one by most accounts, but not part of the inner circle. He didn't sponsor little league teams or slap his name on billboards. He fixed things quietly, priced his work fairly, and went home without asking much from the town in return. That made some people uncomfortable. Respect in their eyes had to be earned their way, through the right social clubs, the right church pews, the right friends at the plant. But after yesterday, people had started looking at the Green family a little differently. Not with pity, not with polite indifference, with curiosity, and a hint of something else, admiration. Meanwhile, back at the garage, Micah didn't say much about it. He never did. The only thing that changed was the way he looked at Noah when he walked in after school. It wasn't pride, not in the showy sense, but recognition. The kind of look a man gives when he sees a door opening for his child that had always stayed closed for himself. He handed Noah a wrench to work on the axle of a customer's truck, and simply said, "You see the problem with the caliper yet?" Noah nodded, already halfway through diagnosing the misaligned rotor. Nothing had changed between them, and yet everything had. The bond forged over years of shared work and quiet trust had just been given its first real glimpse of the world beyond their two-bay garage. But while respect quietly started growing in corners of the town, in one particular corner it curdled into something bitter. Tyler Morgan felt it the moment he walked into school. He'd expected laughter. He expected to be congratulated on such a creative prank. Maybe people would give him a hard time for wasting their time, sure, but he had figured he'd still be the center of the story. Instead, people barely looked at him, and when they did, it wasn't with the smirks of co-conspirators. It was with confusion, some even with faint disgust. He caught pieces of conversations that cut deeper than any direct insult. "Can't believe he tried to set the kid up like that." "How insecure do you have to be to go after a kid like Noah? Should have been proud someone from our town could think like that." Tyler tried to act like it didn't bother him. He walked with the same cocky gait, threw out the same jokes, laughed louder than usual, but it didn't land the way it used to. People's reactions had shifted. Even his closest friends were distant. Carter hadn't mentioned the video once, and Miles was quieter than usual, clearly uncomfortable every time the press incident came up. The attention had swerved completely, off of Tyler and onto Noah, not because Noah demanded it, but because he deserved it. And Tyler had no idea how to handle being irrelevant in a story he tried to control. That afternoon, two of the factory floor supervisors stopped by the garage under the pretense of a tire alignment, but both of them shook Noah's hand. One even said, "You ever need a recommendation letter, you just say the word." By evening, Micah's voicemail had two new messages, one from a community college professor who'd heard about the incident, and another from a local news station asking for an interview. Micah didn't return either call. Not because he wasn't proud, but because he didn't want Noah's world to turn into something artificial. Let the boy grow into this at his own pace. Let the noise die down before it tried to turn a real moment into a spectacle. But not everyone wanted it to die down. Behind the polished glass walls of the executive offices above the plant, Diane Anderson, the factory's operations chief and Tyler's mother, was hearing the same story repeated, and she wasn't happy. Not because the machine was fixed, not even because it was a kid who fixed it. She was furious that it had happened without her consent, furious that someone from outside their trusted circle had walked onto her factory floor and solved a crisis in front of her employees. It undermined the hierarchy she had worked so hard to protect. Because in places like this, success didn't just come from results, it came from control. And this in her eyes was disorder. Public, unflattering disorder. By the next day, subtle pressure began to surface. One of Micah's regular clients, a fleet manager from a local trucking company, suddenly got word that their safety inspections were being reviewed. Another longtime customer reported that they'd received a friendly call from someone at the zoning office about compliance updates. Nothing formal, nothing you could trace. But in towns like Millbridge, the machinery of quiet retaliation was well-oiled and always running in the background, and those close enough to the levers could tug them without leaving fingerprints. Micah noticed. He wasn't naive, but he said nothing to Noah. Instead, he kept working, kept billing fairly, kept doing what he had always done, because men like him didn't let storms push them off their path. They just checked the forecast and kept their tools ready. But the town was watching now. And for the first time in a long time, people were questioning who really deserved the power they held, because the mechanic's boy had walked into a place where he was meant to be laughed at, and walked out having reminded everyone what it looked like when talent met humility. And in a place where whispers shaped reputations faster than any newspaper ever could, those whispers were now telling a new story, one about a boy who didn't just fix a machine, but exposed exactly who the real weak links were. The week after the press came back online, things in Millbridge began to shift in small, deliberate ways. At first it was hard to notice unless you were looking closely. Subtle things, seemingly disconnected, just enough to be dismissed as coincidence. But for those who'd lived in town long enough, who understood the unspoken rules and the invisible hands that moved the pieces behind the scenes, it became clear that someone was pulling strings, and they weren't doing it out of pride, they were doing it out of fear. Micah Green's shop, which had always kept a steady but modest rhythm, suddenly found itself running a bit leaner than usual. The phone rang a little less. 2 regular customers called to cancel their scheduled repairs. One said their company was reassessing their vendor relationships. The other mentioned something about a new policy requiring all fleet maintenance to go through a corporate-approved provider. No one said it out loud, but the message was clear. Someone was sending a signal. Stay in your lane. Then came the visits. Not the friendly kind. A man from the zoning board came by, clipboard in hand, asking about permits for the lift Micah had installed 8 years ago, something that had never once raised an eyebrow. The next day, a fire safety inspector arrived, unannounced, and spent 2 hours walking the property with a red pen, marking a checklist Micah had passed with flying colors every single year. When asked if there'd been a complaint or a trigger for the inspection, the man simply smiled and said, "Random audit." But in Millbridge, nothing was random. The real blow came when the parts supplier from the next county over, the one Micah had used for over a decade, called and politely explained that they would no longer be delivering to Green's garage. They offered no explanation, no apology, just a final invoice and a vague mention of new account restrictions. Micah hung up the phone slowly, staring out the dusty window of his office, as if waiting for the rest of the pieces to fall into place. He knew this wasn't about business. It was politics, reputation, control. He'd lived long enough in Millbridge to know that the real power never showed its face. It moved through favors, debts, and unspoken threats. It didn't take much to figure out where the pressure was coming from. Diane Anderson had built her reputation on discipline, on control. Her office was a clean room in a dirty industry, and her word carried the weight of policy in places where policy didn't officially exist. She couldn't afford to let a story spread, that her engineers were outsmarted by a child, that her plant had been saved by someone who didn't carry a degree or a badge or a title, and worst of all, that it had happened without her knowing. She hadn't been on the floor that day. She hadn't signed off on Noah stepping foot inside the press zone. It had all been arranged through Tyler, off the books, off protocol, and now spinning wildly beyond her ability to contain it. The factory's workers were talking. The supervisors were curious. Even her most trusted lieutenants were asking, "Did you hear what the Green kid did?" And every time that question was whispered in her presence, Diane felt something rare and deeply unsettling, loss of control. So she did what Millbridge's elite had always done when challenged from below. She tightened the screws, quietly, legally, indirectly, enough to remind the town that even if brilliance showed up in a garage, it still answered to those in charge. But control has limits, and resentment has a way of growing roots when it's watered by injustice. By Friday, the story had reached people beyond Millbridge. A regional manufacturing journal picked up the anecdote from a plant employee who posted on a private forum. The story was short and vague, but the message was clear. Small-town kid identifies critical fault in hydraulic press system. Solves issue in minutes after experts fail for days. The post didn't name names, but it didn't have to. The people who knew already knew, and those who didn't were suddenly curious. The local high school principal received a call from a nearby technical college asking to schedule a visit with Noah. A retired engineer who lived 2 towns over drove down just to meet the boy who saw the valve. Customers who'd stopped coming to the garage trickled back, now offering quiet words of support and awkward smiles that seemed to say, "I didn't know what side to be on, but I'm with you now." The shift wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was persistent, like the slow, inevitable turning of a machine coming back to life. Tyler saw it all happen and felt himself being pulled further into the shadows. For the first time in his life, his name didn't open doors, it closed them. His classmates no longer admired his confidence, they questioned his motives. His teachers stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt. Even his friends no longer repeated his jokes or backed his stories without hesitation. It was like some invisible cord had snapped between him and the rest of the world. He blamed Noah, of course. Blamed him for being too smart, too calm, too real. Tyler had grown up thinking the world was shaped by appearances, by names, by who spoke loudest. But now, in the quiet, it was Noah's voice people remembered. Not because it shouted, but because it understood. At home, Tyler's frustration boiled over. He snapped at his parents. He refused to eat dinner. He told his mother she should have never let it happen. But Diane didn't snap back. She didn't yell. She just stared at him with that same icy focus she gave to underperforming employees, calculating, weighing, reassessing. Her plan hadn't worked, and for once she had no immediate fix. What neither of them realized was that the more they tried to tighten their grip, the more people began to see who was really trying to strangle progress. Because in every whispered warning, in every conveniently timed audit, in every cancelled part order, people began to see the shape of the system, and they began to ask questions, not about if Noah was special, but about why someone so special had ever been doubted in the first place. The answers weren't comfortable, but they were long overdue. It was just after noon when the sleek grey sedan pulled up outside Green's garage, its paint so clean it reflected the cloudy sky like glass. The engine barely made a sound as it shut off. From inside, a man stepped out with careful precision, not the hurried movement of a customer late for a repair, but the measured pace of someone who came with purpose. He was dressed differently than the usual folks who stopped by. Not a factory worker or a truck driver, not a fleet manager or someone asking about tires. This man wore a blazer, not flashy but tailored. Wire-frame glasses sat balanced on the bridge of his nose. He took a slow glance around the lot, eyes landing on the faded signage, the patch of gravel where the drainage had sunk just slightly, the dented soda machine near the door with the out-of-order note taped over the coin slot. Then he stepped inside. Micah looked up from under the hood of an old Dodge Dakota, sweat beading across his brow, the back of his shirt damp with the heat trapped in the close air of the shop. He straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag as he studied the man approaching. The stranger offered a calm smile and extended his hand. "Dr. Elias Ramirez," he said, "Mechanical Systems Engineer, Eastern State Technical. I believe you've got a very unusual mind working here." Micah didn't shake right away. He was a man used to questions, not compliments. "You hear about the press?" he asked, eyes narrowed. Ramirez nodded. "In a way, yes. Word travels, Mr. Green. A hydraulic press down for 3 days, revived in minutes by your son. That sort of thing doesn't just impress, it sparks conversation." Micah folded the rag carefully, half to buy time, half to ground himself. "Noah didn't do it for conversation," he said. "He was just curious, that's how he is." "That's exactly why I'm here," Dr. Ramirez replied, glancing toward the open bay where Noah was crouched beside a vehicle, examining a stubborn axle bolt with laser-like focus. "Curiosity that precise, that calm, that functional, it's not common, especially not in someone so young." Micah followed his gaze but said nothing. He watched his son working, oblivious to the conversation happening a few feet away. Then finally he asked, "So what do you want?" Ramirez didn't flinch. "I want to talk to him, offer something, a chance, not a demand. No cameras, no headlines, no pressure, just an opportunity to learn. At Eastern State we have a program for early mentorship, not just tutoring, but one-on-one shadowing, real-world problem-solving. No grades, no formal curriculum, just access to minds that ask better questions. I think your son is one of them." Micah's jaw tightened, not from distrust of Ramirez, but from the weight of the moment. People had come to Millbridge before, offering things in fancy packages that turned out hollow. It wasn't the offer that worried him. It was the price Noah might have to pay for accepting it. "He's still a kid," Micah said. "He's got oil in his socks and 100 questions about brake drums and alternators. That's the way I like it. The way he does too." Ramirez gave a slow nod, not arguing. "Then let him decide. I'm not here to pull him out of this life. I'm here to make sure the world doesn't miss someone who sees what others can't." Micah turned and called across the shop, "Noah, come here a second." The boy stood up, brushed off his knees and walked over, cautious but curious. His gaze flicked to the stranger, noting everything, the way he stood, the way he spoke, the questions forming already. "Noah," Micah said, "this is Dr. Ramirez. He's got something he wants to tell you." Ramirez crouched slightly so they were eye level. "I heard about what you did at the plant. That kind of thinking, that focus. It's something I see in my top grad students. But they're usually 25, not 8. I work with people who try to make machines better. I think you already understand how to hear what machines are trying to say when they're broken." Noah blinked once. "Machines don't talk. They just stop working when something doesn't make sense." Ramirez smiled. "Exactly. Most people never realize that, but you do." He handed Noah a simple card. No brochure, no folder. Just a plain white card with a number and a name. If you ever want to see what other kinds of machines are out there, machines you've never touched, machines most people never even get to stand near, I'll be there. And if you say no, that's fine too. You've already proven you know how to fix what others can't. Noah took the card and looked at it without saying a word. He didn't smile, didn't nod. He was still processing the way he always did when faced with a problem he hadn't solved yet. Later that night, as the shop closed and the lights dimmed, Noah sat on the back steps of the garage, the card still in his hand. Micah joined him, settling down beside him with 2 root beers. They sat in silence for a long time. "You thinking about it?" Micah finally asked. Noah nodded. "Yeah, but I don't want to stop working here. I don't want to go away." "You won't," Micah said. "Not if you don't want to. You can learn from people and still come home. The garage will still be here. So will I." Noah looked up at him, eyes thoughtful. "What if they try to change me?" Micah smiled at that, faint but certain. "They won't. You know why?" Noah shook his head. "Because you already know who you are. You figured that out way earlier than most people do. That's not something they can take from you. It's something they'll try to learn from." And in that quiet, under the soft hum of the shop's cooling engine bay, with 1,000 stars flickering overhead and the echo of a machine long since fixed still drifting through the town's memory, Noah understood something. It wasn't about leaving behind what made him. It was about building on it, using it, carrying it forward, like a tool you never put down. He didn't have to choose between the shop and the future. He just had to choose how far he wanted to go, and how loud he wanted to let his quiet genius speak. It was 3 days after Dr. Ramirez's visit when Tyler finally showed up at the garage again. He didn't come with friends this time. No Carter, no Miles, no smug smile curling at the edge of his mouth. Just Tyler, alone, jaw tight, shoulders rigid, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his designer jacket that looked oddly out of place against the grease-stained concrete of Green's garage. He stood just outside the entrance, watching as Noah crouched next to the rear wheel of an old Ford, focused on something inside the drum brake. Noah didn't look up at first. He was working, and when he was working, the rest of the world usually disappeared. Tyler shifted his weight, cleared his throat, and finally stepped forward, his shadow falling long across the garage floor. "We need to talk," he said, and it wasn't a request. His voice didn't carry the usual mockery, but it wasn't exactly apologetic either. It was something in between, like someone used to being in control now fumbling to get it back. Noah slowly stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked him in the eyes. "What about?" There was a long pause. Too long. Tyler didn't know how to start because the thing he'd come to say wasn't something he'd ever practiced before. He wasn't used to having to explain himself, especially not to someone younger, someone quieter, someone who had somehow managed to do what he couldn't, win the room without trying. "This thing with the press," Tyler started, trying to sound casual but failing. "People are making it a big deal, too big. They're saying you fixed it on your own, but you didn't really, right? I mean, you guessed. It wasn't like you knew, right?" Noah stared at him, expression unreadable. He didn't answer immediately. He didn't raise his voice. He just tilted his head slightly and said, "Why do you need me to say that?" Tyler blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What?" "You're not asking because you don't know what happened," Noah said calmly. "You were there. You saw it. You're asking because you want to feel better about it." Tyler flushed red. "No, that's not—" He stopped himself. The lie died halfway out of his mouth. "You thought it was a joke," Noah continued. "You thought if I failed, people would laugh. And if I got lucky, you'd still get to say it was your idea. Either way, you win. But that's not what happened." Tyler's jaw clenched, his hands forming fists inside his pockets. He wanted to push back, to say something cruel, something sharp enough to wound. But he couldn't, because deep down, beneath the frustration and resentment, he knew Noah was right. It hadn't gone the way he'd planned, and now the fallout was peeling layers off a version of himself he didn't know how to defend. Tyler said finally, voice softer now, almost unsure. "I didn't think anyone would care this much. It was supposed to be nothing." "It was never nothing," Noah said. "Not to the people whose jobs depended on that machine. Not to the workers, not to my dad, and not to me." Silence settled between them like smoke. Outside, a breeze stirred dust across the lot, and somewhere far off, the factory whistle marked the change of shift. Tyler looked around the garage, really looked for the first time. The stained walls, the scattered tools, the quiet order of a place where every bolt had a purpose. He didn't belong here, not because of who he was, but because he didn't understand it. Not the work, not the people, not the meaning it held. "I didn't come to say sorry," he muttered, and Noah nodded. "I figured. I came because everyone's acting like you're a genius now, like you're some kind of hero, and I don't know where that leaves me." Noah shrugged. "That's not my problem." It was blunt, not cruel but honest in a way Tyler wasn't used to hearing. There was no malice behind Noah's words, just the truth, and that made it land harder than any insult ever could. Tyler turned, about to leave, but then paused. "Do you even care about all of it? The attention, the professors, the new stuff?" Noah thought for a moment. "I care about fixing things. That's it. If people notice, fine. If they don't, that's fine too. But I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw just to make you feel better." Tyler swallowed hard, his pride flickering like a faulty light switch. "Yeah, okay," he said. "Guess that's fair." Then he turned and walked back toward the parking lot. Head down, steps slower than they used to be. Something in him was shifting. Whether it would stay shifted was still a mystery. Inside the garage, Micah had been watching from a distance, not eavesdropping, but close enough to see the exchange unfold. As Noah returned to the truck, Micah handed him the socket wrench he'd been using earlier. "You all right?" Noah nodded, sliding back under the wheel well. "Yeah, he just needed me to lie. I didn't." Micah said nothing more. He didn't have to. Because in that moment, more than in any moment before, he saw not just a skilled boy, but a grounded one. A boy who knew the value of truth even when it made things uncomfortable. Who understood that real respect wasn't earned through applause but through conviction. Later that evening, someone uploaded a clip to a private industry forum. It was short, just a minute long. A quiet exchange caught on the factory floor the day Noah fixed the press. In it, you could hear someone ask him, "How did you know what was wrong?" And you could hear his reply, plain and simple. "Because I listened to it. It didn't sound broken. It just sounded confused." Within hours, the clip started making rounds, not because of who said it, but because of how it was said. Calm, observant, true, and in places far beyond Millbridge, in workshops and offices and design labs where people spent their lives trying to make things work, a new conversation began about listening, about understanding, and about a boy who never wanted to be a hero but became one anyway by telling the truth when it mattered most. Noah didn't notice the shift in the town right away. It happened like fog lifting at sunrise, gradually, imperceptibly, until one day you look around and realize the road ahead is clearer than you remembered. People who used to glance past him in the grocery store now gave him slow, thoughtful nods. A few even smiled. The post office clerk, who'd barely looked up when Micah mailed parts orders, now asked how Noah was doing in school, like it was something she'd cared about all along. The guys at the scrapyard started putting aside pieces they thought he'd find interesting. Old relay boxes, a bent hydraulic pump, even a broken control board that looked beyond salvageable until Noah took it home, cracked it open, and showed his dad how the board's traces had overheated from a failed diode. Still, He didn't let the attention distract him. Every day after school, Noah came straight to the shop, not because he had to, because he wanted to. There was always something new to figure out. An ignition system that wouldn't prime, a diagnostic that didn't match the symptoms, an air compressor unit that worked fine until it didn't. And every time Noah approached the problem the same way he'd approached the press. He watched, he listened, he questioned things most people never thought to question. His hands moved with more confidence now, not because he thought he knew everything, but because he finally understood what it meant to trust his instincts. Micah watched his son grow sharper by the day, and though he never said much, the pride in his eyes was quiet and steady. He didn't care if people in town suddenly wanted to talk to him more. He didn't care if his shop was getting more business. He cared that his boy was finding his way, not in someone else's shadow, not by climbing someone else's ladder, but by walking his own road, one step at a time. One evening, a black SUV rolled up again. Not Tyler this time, not even Diane. This time, the woman who stepped out was wearing a navy blazer and low heels coated in road dust. Her name was Helena Rayner. She worked for the Regional Department of Innovation and Industrial Development, a title so long it barely fit on her business card. But she wasn't there to flash credentials. She came with something different, an idea. Micah offered her coffee, which she accepted, and they sat in his cramped office with paperwork scattered across the desk and an old wall fan humming quietly in the corner. Noah sat nearby, silent, watching her eyes more than her words. She didn't patronize, she didn't oversimplify. She spoke like someone who dealt with smart people all day and didn't feel the need to dumb things down. "I read the report from Millbridge Steel," Helena said. "I saw the sensor logs, the downtime records, the diagnostics, and I saw the part where a problem that stumped every expert got solved by someone not even old enough to legally walk onto the factory floor. We don't usually get stories like that." She paused, meeting Noah's eyes. "You didn't just find a stuck valve, you found a system flaw. You understood the limits of data and trusted the logic behind the design. That's not a lucky guess, that's an engineer's brain." Noah shifted in his seat. Compliments still made him uncomfortable. He didn't know what to say, so he stayed quiet. Helena continued, sliding a folder across the desk. "There's a statewide initiative starting this fall. Pilot programs for youth innovation labs. We're selecting a small number of students to participate, kids who think differently. You wouldn't have to leave school or move away. We'd bring the equipment to you, field instructors, access to simulation tools, industrial models you could test and break and rebuild. No grades, just exploration." Micah opened the folder slowly. Schematics, timetables, a letter of intent. Noah glanced at them, then back at her. "Why me?" Helena didn't hesitate. "Because people like you are rare, not because of your age, but because of your clarity. You don't chase the answer. You follow the question. That's the difference." For the first time, Noah smiled. Not wide, but real. The kind of smile that meant he understood the weight of what she was offering. Not fame, not attention. A challenge, a bigger problem to solve. The program began 3 weeks later. Once a week, after his shift at the garage, Noah met with 2 instructors from the State Tech Division. They brought machines the town had never seen. Miniature turbines, programmable actuators, frictionless bearing models, and modular systems designed to replicate real-world failures. Noah took to them instantly, not just as a student, but as someone reshaping the problem itself. He didn't just follow instructions. He redesigned tests, asked why certain variables weren't isolated, challenged load tolerances others ignored, and every time something failed, he studied it more closely than if it had succeeded. Word spread again, not loud this time, not viral, just the slow, respectful way that truth spreads among people who work with their hands and their minds. Engineers from 2 counties over stopped by, asking to see what the green kid was building. One left behind a textbook and said it was outdated but still useful. Another returned a week later with a tool set and said, "No need to return it, just keep building." Even some of the factory supervisors from Millbridge Steel came by after their shifts, asking Noah if he could take a look at other systems that had been acting strange. Not because they couldn't figure it out, but because they wanted to see how he saw things. And as all of this happened, under the flickering lights of a small-town garage, with the scent of warm oil and metal in the air, Noah never changed his pace. He never bragged, never acted like he was above the work. Because in his mind, nothing had really changed. There were still systems breaking down, still machines that needed listening to, still problems waiting to be noticed before they became too big to ignore. One afternoon he was adjusting the gearing on a cracked hydraulic lift when his dad asked him something out of the blue. "Do you ever think about where this might take you?" Noah didn't look up right away. He finished adjusting the tension, rechecked the balance, then finally said, "Sometimes." "Where do you think that is?" Micah asked, only half expecting an answer. Noah just shrugged. "Wherever things stop working." It was such a simple answer, but it said everything. Because he didn't need a spotlight, he didn't need applause, he just needed the next broken thing, whatever it was, wherever it waited, so he could do what he was born to do, make it right again.